You're listening to Last Word Radio, where you get the last word.
Welcome to the Fourth Line Podcast in partnership with Last Word on Sports. This is August the 19th, 2017. And with you today is myself, Carl, and there is no always wonderful Joel this week. For right now, it is just myself. And I think I've mentioned previously on the show how incredibly awkward it is sitting here talking to just a microphone. Usually Joel's not in the same room as me, but I can see him on the Skype machine. He's there. Today it's just me. I'm just sitting here. And so we're going to keep this short as possible. A couple weeks ago, we had the honor to hop on the Modern Manhood Podcast with German Villegas and had a very interesting conversation about what masculinity means in the world of hockey, and especially, focusing on the NHL. And so what was nice about that conversation was he took the lead. We were on his show, and this is a show or a topic that he knows quite well. They talk about it. And his show, Modern Manhood Podcast, definitely go check it out. They explore what it looks like, what masculinity and manhood looks like in the modern age. And so, it's a topic that he explores every episode on his show. He knows it quite well. So I, definitely took the backseat to him on this topic and let him take the lead. So you will hear, for a change, I get to be the one being asked a lot of the questions, which is quite nice. So yeah, definitely very excited to have him on the show this week, or to air the conversation that we had on his show on ours. So head over to modernmanhood.org to check out what more is happening. You can also find him at Modern Man Pod on Twitter. Thank you very much to Armand for having me onto your show and for letting us rebroadcast it over here. So without further ado, the Modern Manhood Podcast.
Thank you, Carl, for being a guest on the episode here. Hockey's always on my brain, just because I live in Edmonton and hockey's everywhere here, especially during the winter seasons. And I always want to talk about the relationship between masculinity and hockey and how that relates to each other. So I'm glad to have you here. You're somebody that talks hockey all the time. So I really want to get your insight in a lot of these things. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be on and just talk about, the world of hockey is especially like the NHL, it's men's sports. It's very masculine. And I'm, excited to talk about what that looks like and what that is.
Yeah, totally. And it's interesting you say that because in Canada specifically, the realm of hockey and the way that masculinity is played during hockey is the way a lot of men see themselves at, or they compare themselves to. Do you think that there's a correlation there between the way that men see themselves into the way that they see their favorite hockey players?
Certainly, yeah. I think if you define yourself by a lot of things, and growing up as kids, especially in Canada, our heroes are hockey players, and so you look at Wayne Gretzky as a kid, or Sidney Crosby right now, Connor McDavid. These are the best players out there. And you have your local heroes, and these are the guys that little kids are putting on, and that's how they start to define themselves. They want to be that. And so we look at ourselves through that lens because that's who we want to be when we grow up.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And do you see some problems with that, or do you see that that's something healthy?
Certainly there is potential for problems in that. I think when we look at it, a lot of athletes, you hear the conversation all the time of an athlete saying, well, I'm not a role model. I don't want, that's not who I am. And that's not true in the slightest, because whether you like it or not, kids look up to you. And that's 100% a reality. So when you have this kid who's, 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old, whatever it is, watching you, that's the way that it works. So certainly it has an impact on that.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny you say that, because I went to my nephew's birthday party, and he's 5 years old, and he asked his dad to give him, these little cake pops, but they're like dressed up in like hockey helmets, and he asked to put like 97 on it. And I'm like, he's 5 years old. This is like Connor McDavid to him is going to be the guy for him for a long, long time. And the way that he does things and the way that he portrays himself in the real world is the way that it wants to be. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, for sure.
So if he does something wrong, or if he does something weird, I don't know if you remember when you were a little kid and you really idolized a hockey player. Like, how do you think that shapes a little mind there? Like, is there anything in around hockey do you feel that might not be good?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of times when that can happen. Certainly, not every athlete does the nicest of things. And as a kid, you don't understand that until it becomes a thing, right? Mm-hmm. I'm trying to remember back to the first instance of that. I think, the one that stands out to me the most, and I wasn't a kid at the time, but the first negative incident was probably like the Todd Bertuzzi incident when he jumped Steve Moore there. I was probably 13, 14. I knew that hockey had a violent side to it. But at that point, you kind of do that. So as a kid, let's say, Todd Bertuzzi was not an unknown quantity in Vancouver at that time. He was a big part of that team. So you're a kid in Vancouver, and all of a sudden, a guy that you like, a guy that you cheer for and want to watch play does that. That has a huge impact on how you perceive things, because now you have to rectify it, and adults have a hard enough time coming to terms with that, right? When someone when an athlete does something, you're like, oh, what do I do? Like this guy whose jersey I have, who's now, charged with a crime or suspended for this thing that I don't condone, but that's the jersey I wear to a game.
Yeah.
It's tough for an adult, and I think as kids, it's even more difficult.
Yeah, totally. It's funny you say that, like the adults have a tough time with that. And, and we were talking just earlier, we were talking about like the Patrick Kane saga, and he's a star, in Chicago. And like, I totally see this like kind of, defense mechanism that gets put up to their stars. And, saying things like, oh, we got to wait till everything's good. I think he got the bum rap here. And like, we still don't know what happened in that case. That case is really, really weird. But even then, like people defended him pretty tightly. And it was a weird thing to see. Do you agree?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I know like we didn't at the time really talk about it on the show because, I think we did say this on the show, is that he either isn't guilty and we don't want to talk about it, or he did something terrible and we don't want to promote it. Mm-hmm. And we still don't know what the actual truth of it is, whether he did something he shouldn't have, or even something, not necessarily something illegal. Because I think there's, a difference between what's illegal and what's a skeezy move. I will never know. You will never know what actually happened. And to me, that's I'm not going to promote anything in regards to that.
Yeah.
I'm not going to talk negatively about Patrick Kane because of something that I don't know about.
Yeah.
And as in the public eye, that's a huge thing of what is or isn't you become. And that's the same thing, that's the same realm as the I'm not a role model. Like,
Yeah.
what you do is now a matter that people care about. If if I'm out at a pub on a Friday night, no one knows or cares, what I'm talking about or anything like that. When you're suddenly a professional athlete playing in one of the biggest markets in the United States, and the best player on that team in the biggest market, one of the biggest markets, you are suddenly a target for the media. People care what you do. People care what you say. People care about your actions. And when you act in a questionable manner, it's going to become news.
Totally. Yeah. And I see a lot of people have a problem. I mean, hockey players in general have a problem with trying to separate that. I think I see a lot of players actually are really good with that. And try to be role models for their kids. Like I think of just retired Andrew Ference. I know more of Andrew Ference for the stuff that he does outside of hockey than what he did in hockey. Like what he did for the Oilers was very minimal for the stuff that he did outside in the community. But do you think that the NHL does a good job in trying to, explain to their players that you are a role model to these kids and trying to do things like this? Or do you think that the NHL, still has some problems in trying to promote their players in that respect?
I think that they still have a problem. I think every professional sports league has that problem. Does the NHL do it better than others? Maybe. Because there is a very large amount of players who do it that well. Like especially if you look, like in Canada, Sidney Crosby was the most marketed player in the league. And now, he hasn't handed that fully over to Connor McDavid, but in due time he will. And those are two guys who, keep their image very clean. They don't really ruffle any feathers. Like the fact that McDavid called out Brendan Manning earlier this year, and it was like, well, Connor McDavid said something like, not even controversial, but like he said something negative about another player. That was a huge story because they were like he has personality. Like that's it. He has it. We're set.
It's so true.
And so, like that's part of the whole realm of it is Canadian, not Canadian athlete, but like kind of the top two most marketable players in Canada right now are very clean in their image.
Yeah.
And that's something that the NHL probably appreciates. They don't want to have their best athletes having problems. So I think from that angle, it's good. And I think that they are trying to remove some of the negative aspects from the game. You're seeing, fines for negative behavior on the ice, whether it be things that are said, actions that are taken that are, not appropriate, whether like any form of slur is not condoned by the league. And, in every sport that's going to happen. That's not something that we will, I'd like if that could be removed, but it's probably not a realistic expectation. It can be a goal, but to fully remove it will not happen. But the NHL does what they can to remove that and to help people at least be aware, because, you say that and it will probably never cross your mind. And the fines that they hand out are not a back-breaking amount for these players, but it's enough that you think about it. Like I have been punished and I've been publicly punished for it. Now people know what I've done and that, it's not good. And some people will care, some people will not. Some people will like that. They'll be like, oh, like I love that this guy says whatever he wants. But the NHL makes sure that they, can do that. Because, from the marketing side, if Connor McDavid, used some sort of offensive remark on the ice and got suspended for it, his sponsors, his team probably wouldn't be too happy with him.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I think that goes back to the very kind of conspiracy theory of like, does the NHL protect people like Sidney Crosby or people like Connor McDavid? Because I'm very curious as to what would happen if Connor McDavid gets caught saying a slur, a gay slur or a racist slur or whatever. Yeah, I'm very curious of what would happen in that respect, because you're right. Like, it's not just this fine that they get. It's like whatever they got, but it is a public shaming, and yeah, I wonder how they would treat that. And I'm also very curious because that, in that respect, that kind of has happened. Not that a very popular player has gotten into trouble. We're not even talking about Patrick Kane. I brought up the issue of Bobby Hall, and Bobby Hall has had a lot of history of domestic violence and has had a lot of problems in that regard. So much so that like the Winnipeg Jets feel like they want to step away from Bobby Hall. I don't know if he got invited to play in I know there was something going on when the Heritage Classic was on, that Bobby Hall was either not present, and I think a lot of it was because of that. But he still shows up in NHL ads. So what do you make of that?
Yeah, I think I get why he still shows up in ads, because to a lot of people, they don't know that, right? A lot of the average fan doesn't know the not nice part of that. So they know Bobby Hall is a great player, and he certainly was. And so I get why the NHL still uses that, because it works for them. Their goal is to make money, and they can do that. And however, for the core of a fan base, they know their players quite well. They know the good and the bad of that. And so I get from the Jet side why they want to distance themselves from Bobby Hull and that aspect of it. Especially like the Winnipeg Jets are a team that is very much having to tailor to a fan base right now. Mm-hmm. They are a team that, coming back into the league, they haven't won a lot of hockey. They are literally still running based off of nostalgia. Pretty much.
Yeah,
like
totally.
That's how people show up in the building, to remember the Jets. And so, yeah, it's a big deal to them to treat that relationship well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think that the NHL does well right now? Like, I mean, Bobby Hall aside, do you think that the NHL does well in trying to deal with things like domestic violence? In the case of like things like Voinov or Varlamov or any one of those people, do you think that the NHL does a good job now?
I think so, because I've seen it. No one's going to be able to do it as well. And what's difficult is, you have this scenario where there is the balance between accusation and guilt. And so, for example, in the Varlamov situation, one that I'm close to, that was, I am an Avalanche fan.
Mm-hmm. Sorry to you, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's something I'm dealing with in an entirely different realm. So, like with the Varlamov thing, he was found not guilty in the end. Mm-hmm. He was cleared of all charges, and that was something. And then he went back with the team, and he did that, and he was with the team during that time, whereas Voinov was suspended immediately and removed from the team, and there was guilt in that scenario. And so for me, there's that difference, and it's tough for a league and a business and people to know, because essentially in a lot of ways there's the perceived guilt immediately. And mm-hmm. I think that's something that we need to find a way to deal with. We want to take these very seriously, and we should take them very seriously. These, domestic violence or any sort of, sexual assault, domestic violence are huge deals that as a society we need to handle better. And so, we should treat them seriously. We should make sure that as a sport, it's not something that we condone, and it is something that in the past was okay, mm-hmm. and could have, festered in that and grown out of it. So, certainly when it comes to, the Voinov, the Varlamov, and any other scenarios like this, I am very okay if the team does, says, you know what, maybe just take some time off, certainly to deal with that problem.
Right.
But also to kind of say like this is something we take seriously. So again, if it were to happen with the Avalanche, if someone on the team were to deal with that, and they were to, suspend them, with or without pay, I think, the pay becomes a different issue, but
yeah,
just to say, you have something more important than the game of hockey happening right now, and you need to deal with that. And it needs to become something that isn't just about the team and about the player. And I know that's the team's job, but the league's job, and especially the PA's job, the Players Association's job, is to take care of their players. It should be very important for them to have a healthy life outside of the game of hockey. And, if that's something you're dealing with, whether there is guilt there or not, there is something that is there is something that's not okay in your life. And that should be, a huge deal.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And, I see this too with like when the Patrick Kane incident happened, he got taken off the cover of the EA Sports game. That was business basically. But he still was allowed to skate and he was allowed to practice. And so I don't know if the Hawks did a good job at trying to just say like, hey, listen, you're dealing with this thing. Just once you're cool with this, then we can move on. But I don't know, that took a long time to get dealt with. And I don't think like the Hawks being without Patrick Kane, especially that year he had like an amazing season and he won the Hart Trophy. So for the Hawks to say like, okay, take some time off to deal with this, I can see their business side coming to say, well, that's one of our more marketable players and also one of our best players. So are we cool with like letting him sit for 3 months so he can deal with this? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I definitely get that.
Yeah. Speaking of domestic violence, though, I know about this case, which I'm still reading news about. I still haven't read any news that led up to like tell me what happened. So last year, Alex Galchenyuk got involved in a domestic violence case, but it was opposite. He was the one who was the victim. He was the one who called the cops on his girlfriend, and he was, the person that was involved in this scenario, but as a victim. And it was really fascinating and interesting because you don't really see this too often, very publicly, anyways. But the way that he approached it was really weird to me. Did you read this case?
Yeah, like you said, not a whole lot of coverage of it, but certainly did happen.
Yeah. So just to catch people up, like, so Alex Galchenyuk when he came back to the Habs, he said, like he didn't want this to be a distraction for the team, like, and he also like basically apologized to it. He said, I don't want to be a distraction. I'm sorry, I am a distraction. I do want to just deal with this and move on. Now, if we reverse the roles here, if we say that this is a women's league and a woman was suffering as a victim of domestic violence, there would be a lot of support and other people saying, like they would have these public views of support or public saying that we're with this person. But there was none of that for Galchenyuk. People just kind of just like brushed it aside almost. Why do you think that is?
I think there's the cultural assumption that, domestic violence does not happen from women towards men, and that like men are tough and that doesn't happen. And, but it's clearly not true. We see that in this instance. And I think, part of that kind of scoffs it off. Especially in sports, the general, the assumption of men being tougher is, permeated into the fact that, it can't be that bad. Like, you're a big, strong man, you're a hockey player, you're tough, it's not an issue. And so going into that realm, it 100% should be looked at in the same way. It's it is an issue for both players, and not both players, but both genders, both roles.
Yeah.
Whether a man doing that to a woman or a woman to a man, it should not be criticized or looked down upon more or less from either. They are both equally terrible.
Do you think that the lack of like public support for Galchenyuk, do you think that has to do with the way that men kind of deal with these kind of issues in general, like especially issues of, I'm thinking of especially issues of mental health. Do you think that specifically hockey players, specifically athletes, just kind of brought all these up and don't want this to be brought out? It seems kind of shameful.
In the mental health realm, that's a really interesting one. Because I think, in general in society now, we're starting to see more of an acceptance of, acknowledging mental health struggles and remedying to fix them. And you're seeing that into sports. And, in sports, you have, the sports psychologists are becoming a huge thing. And I think it kind of hit a point recently, especially in Canada, when Roberto Osuna, closer for the Toronto Blue Jays, missed a game simply because of anxiety. Like, he could not handle what was happening around him. He was becoming anxious. He's setting records for the most saves at his age, and yet it was too much for him. It's overwhelming. And he met with the team psychologist. He met and talked about it and worked on it and tries to fix it. And that's something that, I had never seen a player miss for that reason. You see, players struggle with the ups and downs of losing in sports all the time. It's something that, we've seen, lots of players who can or cannot handle losing, or, a cold streak or whatever that may be. But,
yes. Yeah.
But the fact, the support that you saw coming out from his teammates, from the team, from his manager for Osuna in that instance, to say, we're behind him. We're going to give him this time. Give him whatever time he needs to get himself right, to get himself back together, is a huge step forwards in the mental health aspect in professional sports.
Yeah. And the Osuna case was fantastic. And I think, it was so cool to see that publicly. I mean, I hope that Osuna is doing well. He said that he was doing well. He was talking about it in the All-Star game. But I mean, that was really cool to see. And I'm very curious as to if the NHL would ever do that to another player. And also I read many pieces on the Players Tribune. I was thinking of Dan Carcillo, and his fight to help people outside of retirement. And also the case of Corey Hirsch, who said he was this close to completing suicide until he finally got a conversation with, I think it was Trevor Linden. And that was fascinating for me to hear. I think that that's becoming a little better. But I still worry sometimes about these things, especially the things like Pat Maroon, and about this concussion protocol thing, that I think there's these still little barriers and gaps that hockey players still need to get through, specifically with the high risk and the high and the playing through pain aspect. Do you think that that's becoming a bigger problem nowadays because of the whole debate around concussions?
Yeah, it was a big thing. I don't know if you saw documentary that came out last year, Ice Guardians. That was something they talked about a lot in that, or not a lot, but an amount in that. They talked about the role of the enforcer in the league. They had former enforcers. The one that stands out to me the most in that is Kevin Westgarth, who at the time was playing over in the EIHL. And talking about the impact that, being an enforcer in the league has on you. It's something that a lot of these guys did not choose to do when they started. This was a way that they could continue playing hockey. They were not skilled enough to be a top player, but they found out, if I fight someone, I can play. And these are guys who, it's a change in mentality, a change in that, and dealing with the mental aspects of that is huge. And, I would be incredibly sad. Well, and I have been, because we've seen, individuals, commit suicide or, struggle with substance abuse. I think of, Rick Ripon, the Minnesota Wild guy's name is slipping my mind right now.
Derek
Boogaard, there you go. These are guys that, Wade Belak. These are guys who have passed away way too soon because of this aspect of it. And I'm seeing the NHL start to take this more seriously, and they have to. It's something that if someone gets to the point that they're even considering that you need to work with them to help them. No one should have to deal with that, no matter if you are an enforcer or not, if you're a tough guy or not. Especially if you're a tough guy, if you play a tough role on the ice, to then have to have the vulnerability to go off the ice and say, hey, I'm not okay, I need help, I need to deal with this. The on ice persona, if becomes your reality of the tough guy. I can handle this. I can do it by my own. I don't need that. Whereas, we know that you can't do it alone sometimes. When things get tough, you need your friends, family, and sometimes even professionals who know how to handle those problem scenarios to help you through those.
Totally. And I'm glad to see this coming out too, especially with the NHL is becoming a little bit better in kind of acknowledging these cases and having somebody like the quote unquote concussion doctor come out and take players out. And the Pat Maroon incident that happened, like he said it was like, oh, this is a man's game, and I know what he was trying to say. He wasn't saying this is not a little boy's game. This is a grown man's game. Wasn't anything sexist. But even in that comment, he insinuated that that players can take care of their own health by themselves. And I question that sometimes, because if Connor McDavid said to his coach, yeah, I got hit on the head, I think, I should take myself out because, like, I might have a concussion, I don't know yet. I have a tough time believing that he would do that, first of all, or his coach would be like, no, you're fine, just go out there. Because you're Connor McDavid, you might get 3 points this game. Like, do you find that tough to believe too, or is that just me?
I would have found it tough to believe about 10 years ago. Now I like the fact that if it were to come out that Todd McLellan had said that and Connor McDavid was sent back out there with a concussion, and then they said, oh yeah, that's fine. Like, the ramifications of that and the liability of that, the NHL has been in this lawsuit for years and it's still dragging on. So from that side, I think if I were a coach, even from that side, I would not want the liability of me sending a player willingly out there. I might, say, leave it up to him, like, oh, are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. Okay, good. And not ask more questions. But I certainly would not want to put my own self on the line and say, yeah, you're fine, get out there and play. And you shouldn't. I think we want to make sure that people are healthy in all aspects. And, we're continuing to see more concussions and concussion behavior improve. It was an interesting, dynamic this offseason with Crosby and his surprisingly quick return from concussions.
Yeah, that was another thing too. I was like, he was off for like a day, 2 days. Like, I think he missed a game or 2 games, right?
Well, and then there was the one where he, arguably probably should have left the game and didn't.
Yeah.
And this is a guy who, at this point, Sidney Crosby knows concussions. He has dealt with them for quite some time. And so one would think Sidney Crosby knows if he has a concussion or not. And at that point, it's, well, okay, if you assume he knows if he is or is not concussed, does he care enough to play and or not play and make those decisions? And that is a very personal decision, and something that, I think as we continue down this path, this trajectory that the league's on, we will see less of that. We'll see less people playing with concussions and putting themselves at risk in that way. But I obviously do not know Sidney Crosby and do not know what was happening with him, and I we'll never know in that area. But it's something we will see less of, and I look to, I am, while also being a huge hockey fan, something in Canada that's less popular, I'm a huge NASCAR fan. And last year, I don't know how many of your listeners do or do not care about this.
Never know.
So we'll keep it short just in case. But I guess if they're a NASCAR fan, they already know. But Dale Earnhardt Jr. Had a big concussion last year, missed a lot of the year, and then announced that this season would be his last because he doesn't want another one of those. He doesn't want to miss time. He doesn't want that to impact his future. He just gotten married. He's just wanting to start a family. He doesn't want his brain to be irreparably damaged from the sport that he participates in. So,
wow. Okay. Yeah, no, that's really cool actually to hear that. And I think it will take, like, we talked at the start of the podcast, we started talking about role models and like how players need to understand that they are role models for kids. I think this is a part of it. I think making these tough decisions. I mean, if Sidney Crosby were to say during that playoffs, listen, I just got concussed. I understand that you guys want to go back to back. I understand that I'm the most important player on your team. I got to sit out. Like, I can't, like, if I take another one of these, that might be it for my brain. Like, I really believe that I feel that we need more of that. I think for this to start becoming more of a habit, like the big players to say, yeah, I can't do this, especially someone like Sidney Crosby, who has, like you said, a concussion history. Like, he's missed months and months he missed half a season one year for concussion. So, I mean, like, I don't know. I find it really dubious that he just missed a couple games from that last concussion that he had. And because he was the most important player, and then he goes on to win a Stanley Cup. And like, I'm very curious as to what happened behind the scenes for him to come out again. Yeah, that's a good point though about Dale Earnhardt Jr. That I think it's really cool, especially in NASCAR. That feels like it's more of like a place that's like a quote unquote like very manly man type of environment. Is that true? Yeah.
Yeah. It's no more so than any other sport, I wouldn't say.
Okay. Yeah, I don't really know about NASCAR a whole lot, but I appreciate that. The last topic I wanted to talk to you about was the concept of inclusivity, and how the NHL is doing a lot of work in regards to making hockey a more inclusive environment, specifically for gay players or queer players. Starting with the You Can Play movement, and moving on towards including things like Pride Tape. But we still haven't had, a public player come out, or at least an active player come out as gay. And like I was sending to you as an email, I was like, statistically, there's got to be some. Brian Burke said that he's talked to some. Why do you think that someone hasn't come out yet?
I think it's, as much as the NHL has done the, You Can Play movement and worked hard to make people feel comfortable and safe and open in that realm, they're not there yet. As they want to work on that, and they need to work on that. I definitely think that in due time we will, because in all of professional sports, like you said, statistically, like, there are probably hundreds of athletes in who identify in that way, and they're not. And so I think these leagues have to work on that. And it's not something that, the league can do entirely. I think as we see people, being more understanding of what these people are going through, it'll be more comfortable. But when you're in those locker rooms, clearly there's something going on there. Or, locker rooms, whether you're on the ice, competing, there's still reasons why people don't feel comfortable enough to be open about these things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm curious, what your idea is to why aren't they comfortable yet? Like, why is there this lack of comfort still, regardless of these campaigns and regardless of people going to Pride and, or even Brian Burke making this big conscious effort to make sure that these people are protected. And do you think that there's a weird locker room culture around it?
I think a little bit of that, but also I think a little bit of not wanting to be the first. Because whoever this person is will be the first. And once someone does that, then you will see a lot more people be more comfortable because, for their interviews, we saw that in the NFL, I forget the linebacker's name. He got drafted by the Cowboys, and that was what they were talking about. It wasn't, skill or anything like that. It was sexuality. And that's what this player will, deal with, quote unquote, is those questions. It won't be about hockey. It'll be about that. And so you need to not only be prepared to be open about that, but also to be essentially the poster boy for your sexuality, that you become known for that instead of for your hockey. And so then you have to be willing to play and deal with that. And so in that realm, I think that's a big reason of why we don't, is because, someone hasn't been the first. I think the 200th player who does, it won't be as big of an issue, and people won't, all of a sudden you might just hear oh yeah, so and so is dealing with this, issue. Now you would, trying to struggle with that identity in the future, you'll just hear it and you'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, I didn't know that. It's just a public record that no one really knows. I don't know who most players, this is the off season in the NHL and we're seeing player after player getting married. I had no idea. I saw Cam Atkinson post that he got married. I had no idea he was or was not dating anyone, and I didn't care. That was not something, I do not care about Cam Atkinson's, I don't pay attention to his personal life. That's not something that I feel the great need to know about. And I think we will eventually get to that point, with all players in the league. But for now, I think, one player will be, a big deal.
That's true. That would be, you're right. I never thought about it that way. You're right. It will be the poster boy. I really wish that we would get to a point where, Pierre Maguire just talks about it very, loosely, like this is part of it's just day to day. All you see is, so-and-so's husband's up there cheering for him right now. That's awesome. I really wish that the NHL would just get to that point. But you're right. Being the first one could be a big deal for it. And yeah, you're right. It would be the one. I feel like maybe it would have to be someone that's established already, or someone that's has already a kind of a marketable value, and then to say that couldn't you imagine what it would be if it was somebody like Jonathan Toews, who is this poster boy for the NHL, that he would come out and say, you know what, I am actually gay. That would create such a ripple effect, but we still would not take away the accomplishments that he has done as an NHL player. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And that would be a big first step.
Yeah, totally. Carl, that's all I have for questions for you, my friend. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate you doing this. I know you said that this is something that you guys don't talk about too often in your podcast, but I appreciate you coming over and talking about this kind of stuff. I think it's really important.
Yeah, no, and I think there's a few reasons why we don't talk about it, but it's not something that's not the goal of our show isn't to talk about that,
totally.
But it is something, when things like this come up, we try to deal with it, and definitely open to talking about it and, sharing our thoughts, and hopefully, your listeners might agree or disagree. Would certainly love to continue this chat afterwards. Yeah,
for sure. You can definitely catch Carl and Joel on the Fourth Line podcast. Please check them out. Really awesome podcast. Like you said, it is something that's they're very much a hockey podcast. So if you love hockey, check them out. Carl, where can we find your work?
Yeah, you can find us at thefourthlinepodcast.com. We're on Twitter at fourthlinepodcast. Those would be the two best places. If you're on Facebook, facebook.com/thefourthlinepodcast. If you search the Fourth Line Podcast anywhere that you're looking for podcasts, you'll find us as well. So, feel free to come over, check us out, talk about hockey. Every week we do a weekly show. It's been a lot of fun, even through the summer. So if you're like, man, I really want some hockey, summer talk, and you're sick of whatever your local team is, like diving real deep into your AHL team, we're here for you.
Awesome. That's perfect. Also, if you're doing the Fifth Line too, correct? Is that something else?
No, yeah, that's kind of a new thing that we're doing, us and our buddy Mike. We have started a new kind of, in some ways, we've kind of labeled it a spin-off of the Fourth Line. And that's where we talk about just more general sports, kind of sports and culture. So this past time, we talked about sitcoms and characters that we do not like on sitcoms. And then we did an imaginary league where you have to play, you take the four main sports. So in North America, hockey, basketball, football, baseball, and we picked 7-man teams to play each of those sports. So we drafted from all the leagues, what 7 players would we pick if you had to play all 4 of those sports? So that was kind of a fun conversation.
Interesting. Where did LeBron James land in this one? He must have been first, right?
I took him first overall. 100%.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. He's
like he is a tight end. Yeah. Like Oh.
Yeah. And like, okay, so because you're an Avalanche fan, I do want to kind of. Do you think Deshane's getting traded?
If you had asked me this a month ago, I would have said, yeah. It's the middle of July. I don't know how much more time Joe Sakic needs to make this happen. So, I would say there's a 60% chance that Matt Duchene gets traded.
60%. Okay. You know what? You're right. Like, I thought he would have been traded way earlier than that. I thought the whole Everley thing happened, and I thought like, oh, Deshane's coming right after. But nothing happened. So, yeah, I don't know. It's either this or it's going to happen in September or October. That's the only other thing I can think of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, thank you, Carl. I really appreciate you being on.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thank you for having me. And
no problem.
Look forward to checking out more of your show. Thank you very much to our mom for having this conversation with us a couple weeks ago. Definitely a topic that's not really discussed too often, and we were very honored to be able to have that conversation and to just start the conversation. If there's anything that you want to talk with him about, definitely head over to his Twitter account at Modern Man Pod, and you can also find us as well. We'll send that out in a second, but tune in to more of his shows, modernmanhood.org. And you can kind of head over there, and he's got a lot of different conversations. I know the last episode that he released right now was on masculinity in video games, and it was just a very interesting conversation. So you will want to tune into that. For us, you can find us on Twitter at Fourth Line Podcast, Facebook.com/The Fourth Line Podcast, TheFourthLinePodcast.com, and we are everywhere that you listen to your podcast. So obviously you're listening to it right now. You know how to find us. Keep listening. Thank you very much for your support. Thank you for everyone who supports us on Patreon. And we will be back next week. And potentially, rumor has it, a brand new Fifth Line podcast coming out this week. So stay tuned for that. Carl, Joel, Tiny Mike, it's happening. See you guys later. Boom City.